Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. In this video, we are going to learn the difference between class components and function components and why do we still need to use class components. So on the screen, you can see a class component and a function component which have a common output shown running on my local here. So both of these components will output this UI. Clearly, if we talk about the differences between these two component types, you can see that the amount of code written in class component is definitely more compared to code written in function components having the same output. In class components, we have constructor method which we need to call by passing in the props, and at the same time to initialize a state, we need to initialize that state inside that constructor. On the other hand, in function components, we have use state hook available, using which we can set the states of different variables inside this function component. Apart from that, the other difference in class component and function component is that in function component, we have render method inside which we can update our state and return the UI which we want. On the other hand, in function component, we can simply return the UI which we want using the state variables which we declared. In class components, you can see there is more code required to use this state variable, and on the other hand, you can simply use those state variables using their name. Moreover, to update these variables, you can directly call their set method, and to update the state in class component, you need to call this.state method to update that state, which does the similar work, but at the same time, this is more code compared to the one in function components, and using set methods in function component is much easier compared to class components. Also, class components have your lifecycle methods which are not available in your function component. However, to take care of that, we have use effect hook which we can use in different ways to create lifecycle methods. One more difference if you see in class component and function component is that you need to pass the props in constructor and then you can use those props. However, in function component, you can directly destructure your props and use each of the properties passed to that function component directly without even need to destructure separately. So these are few of the differences between class component and your function component. The major part comes up is why do we still need class components when there is function component which does all the work and is much easier to use. So there are two specific reasons why we still need class components and cannot use function component in those cases. The first one is error boundary and the second one is get snapshot before update. So these are the two things which you require, which can be only achieved by class components and not by function components. Let's take a look at what are these things. So if I go to the documentation, what is error boundary? Error boundary is a class component which you can use to show a fallback UI in case there is some error while rendering your particular node in React. To show that fallback UI, you create a error boundary class and inside that you create two methods. First is get derived state from error method, and then you use the lifecycle method component did catch. Where are these two methods used is if there is an error while rendering your child component, this get derived state from error method will catch that error and you can update the state in that case. As soon as that state gets updated, the fallback UI which you pass as props to this class will be rendered. Here in this render method, you can see as soon as we update the state, the render UI will be shown. Moreover, you can optionally use the component did catch method, lifecycle method, in which you can do some logging or some processing as required. Now, if we look at the error boundary, this is how it's used. You create an error boundary and pass the fallback UI which you want to show in case of error. Inside that error boundary, you pass in a component. This component can be a class component or a function component. But here, error boundary itself will be a class component. And since these methods are not yet available for function components, we need to use error boundary as a class component. So that's the first use case. Our second use case was get snapshot before update. Let's take a look at the documentation of get snapshot before update. So what get snapshot before update provides you is the ability to get the DOM information before the next render happens. So it enables the component to capture some information from the DOM before it is potentially changed. One use case, if you see here mentioned, is that, for example, you can use it in a UI, in a chat UI, where you need to preserve the scroll position before any update happens. So how this method is used is, before your DOM re-renders, React will pass in the previous properties and previous state to this method, where you can do some pre-processing and store these values. Once done, the result of this method is passed to component did update lifecycle method, where you can use these values and perform further actions. To get more details about this, you can visit the documentation on react.dev website and learn more about it. So these are the two reasons why we still require class components as of today. In most of the cases, you will only require function components, and it's recommended to use them since they are easy to use and you need to write less amount of code, and they are much easier to understand compared to class components. But in 1% of the cases where you have requirement of error boundary or get snapshot before update method, in those cases you need to use class components. Definitely in future, if these are also handled by function components, then the class component will get deprecated. So this is a question which is also asked in interviews as well, and these are few things which you can provide as details to the interviewer. I hope you like the video. I'll see you in the next one.